Hey ladies and gentlemen, Mr. T here yet again, and today I hope you liked my first video on the First Amendment, the religion section. You see I got it checked off on our First Amendment board. Now, today we are going into the second part of our First Amendment, and that is speech. Like I said, the First Amendment protects 5 different aspects or rights of American citizens: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. And we're going to go through them in the order they appear in the First Amendment. This is the only amendment I'm going to break up. There might be one other one I might break up, but that's just because it's a super long one and I probably won't have enough time to do it in 10 minutes. But other than that one amendment, and I'll get to that one later, this is the only amendment I'm going to break up. And that's because, like I said in my first video, the First Amendment is each of the 5 sections are so important and such big topic issues that one of the 5 parts of the First Amendment have more court cases and legal aspects and things like that dealing with them than some other amendments have altogether. So that's why I'm breaking them up into the 5 parts, okay? We already covered religion in the first section, okay? Now we got speech, all right? So basically, freedom of speech, a lot of people get this one mixed up, and it's probably been one of the most, next to religion, it's one of the most talked about rights we have. Actually, the 3 most talked about rights we have, and probably, I mean, and this isn't even necessarily like a textbook fact, it's just from watching and listening people on the news and radio, and even in my own life, just hearing people talk and stuff. 3 of the biggest issues I hear of in our government today are speech, religion, and guns. Those are really the 3 biggest issues. Now, I don't mean like, racial issues and religious, I mean all this other back end stuff. I'm talking legally, on the legal end, like our Constitution, our amendments, those type of things. If we're going just off amendments, speech, religion, and guns are really the 3 biggest things I hear talked about. Of all 27 amendments, those are really the 3 I hear talked about the most. So it's really important that we kind of debunk some of the myths and clear up some of the more misconceptions of freedom of speech. Now, freedom of speech, a lot of people think means you could say whatever the beep you want. It doesn't. Okay? It does to a point. You can say a lot. I mean, the United States, you can say more in the United States than any other country. One country, or in Turkey a few months ago, one person actually put side by side a picture of the president of Turkey and a picture of Smeagol from Lord of the Rings. Okay, if you've never seen Lord of the Rings, I highly recommend it. It's not as good as Harry Potter, but it's still pretty good. He put them side by side, and that's it. That's all he did. He posted that, all he did. He got arrested and thrown in jail. I can't remember exactly how it played out because I kind of lost interest in it because then all these other things started happening in the world. But literally all he did, picture of Turkey's president and picture of Smeagol side by side, and they thought it was offensive and threw him in jail. In the United States, you're almost encouraged to speak your mind. If someone did that about Obama or Bush when he was president, or whoever wins the next election, whether it be Trump or Clinton, because those are the 2 big ones running right now. If you post something like that, you're not going to get in trouble for it. You're protected. Now there is stipulations, okay? Some of the stipulations behind freedom of speech. And now, before I get on, I want to clarify. Freedom of speech doesn't just mean the words that come out of your mouth. The Supreme Court has also extended freedom of speech to the way you express yourself, and I'm going to go over that in a little bit. But freedom of speech is not just the words that come out of your mouth. It also has to do with the things you write, the things you post on like Facebook or the internet, and the expressions, whether you burn something like the American flag or a cross or things like that too. Whether you want to wear an armband or a shirt, that also falls under freedom of speech. It's more freedom of expression, and that kind of is all tied into freedom of speech. All right? So I don't want you to think when we say freedom of speech, and when you read freedom of speech or when you read speech in the Constitution, don't think it's just the words that physically come out of your mouth, because it's not. Not Congress. The Supreme Court has said that it is so much more than that. So let's get into it. So what does freedom of speech, what can and can you not do? Well, the Supreme Court has ruled that under freedom of speech, some of the things that you can do, probably the biggest ones are, you have a right to not have to say things like the Pledge of Allegiance. That's a big one. the Pledge of Allegiance has been a thing for almost 100 years. Early 1900s was when it was first written. Yeah, early 1900s when it was first written. And before, it used to be mandatory. For the longest time in U.S. history, you had to say it. If you didn't stand up in class and say it, you got in trouble. And then the Supreme Court said, no, that's violating their First Amendment rights of the freedom of speech. So you don't have to say the Pledge of Allegiance if you don't want to. Now, that doesn't mean schools can't give time for it, and schools can't, as a school say it. Like, so the next time if you're in school and they're like, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, you can't say, oh, that's illegal, you can't do that. You can't say that because the Supreme Court said it's okay. But you as an individual don't have to stand up. You can sit down. You don't have to say it. Now, the schools can keep having that time and, have that time blocked out for it, but you don't have to say it. Okay? That is your right. Now, whether you agree with that or not, the Supreme Court has said it is. Other things. The First Amendment does not protect you burning draft cards. Now, I know we haven't had a draft until the 1970s, but during the 60s and the late 60s, early 70s, we were in the Vietnam War. And Vietnam is by far the most controversial war the United States has ever fought. People went to Canada, Mexico, they left our country in droves. Thousands and thousands of men left our country upon turning 18 just to avoid being drafted in a war they didn't want. Protest rallies and all these different, things were being done against the war. And a lot of people, one of those biggest protests was men upon turning 18, or just men in general, would get their draft cards and burn them in public, saying, I'm not going to go to this war. I'm not going to go fight this war. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. Burning draft cards is illegal. Now, I know we don't have the draft today, but we have selective service. And there hasn't been an exact Supreme Court case on selective service, but selective service is pretty much the child organization to the actual draft. So I'm pretty sure the Supreme Court would agree that your selective service card number and your draft card are pretty much the exact same thing. So if you burn that, then it is against the law, and that is not protected under free speech. Going off that, under war, when we talk about war, Congress did say right after World War I that the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said right after World War I that Congress and just the government in general can restrict your freedom of speech during wartime. And that includes a whole bunch of different things. Not just what you say, but they can restrict the freedom of the press. We'll go over that when we get to that one in the next video. But they can restrict pamphlets and anything you say about against the war. And they don't mean people who are protesting the war like in Vietnam. I mean people who are actually like making it where people are going to rise up, and like if you started saying things that got people to rise up and go against the government fighting in the war, like in a way that wasn't peaceful, that's against the law. Getting people to rise up in a violent manner is against the law. And we're going to go into that when we get to the assembly portion 2 videos from now. Another couple things. Another major thing, and this is very controversial, is the Supreme Court does protect 3 things. And a lot of people, or the First Amendment protects them, the Supreme Court said so. A lot of people disagree with these, but they are protected under the First Amendment. The first one is acts of, not violence, but acts of, let's just call it hate speech. Hate speech, specifically, the court case that allowed it was against the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. They're a white supremacist group, and the Supreme Court did say that the KKK, under the First and 14th Amendment, does have the right to continue saying evil and hurtful things. Now, on that note, before I get into the other 2 things that are controversial, they are not allowed to, say things that impede or basically start a fight. You can't have fighting words. And that's not just with the KKK, that's anyone. The KKK can say racial slurs and hateful things. Anyone can say racial slurs and hateful things, but you cannot say it in a way that would start a fight or impede or harm the peace in general. Okay? So if you don't like someone, you can say something, not necessarily mean about them, but you can say something in general negative about someone's race, color, things like that, but you cannot say it in a way that'll start a fight or start something that'll break up the peace. The other 2 major things that are controversial is the Supreme Court has ruled that burning a flag for political reasons is legal, and burning a cross in general is legal. On the flip side of that, if you burn a cross to intimidate someone like the KKK has generally done in the past, that is illegal. Last thing before I go, the final thing is there was a court case called Miller v. California in 1973, and they established a test called the Miller test, a lot like the Lemon test in the religion section. The Miller test determines whether something is obscene, and obscene basically means like sexual. Okay, it has broader terms, but it kind of means sexual. And the three things to the Miller test is does the average person, now the thing is, the Miller test, you have to violate all three, not just one, all three of these things have to be violated for it to be considered obscene and not allowed in the public. You can still sell it and show it, but only in private, not in the public where like kids can see it. The three things are, does the average modern day person find it offensive? Okay, average, not just one, not just, Jimmy sitting on the side. I mean the average person. 2, does it show patently offensive sexual scenes? And patently offensive just means sexual or obscene sexual scenes, like things like that. And it was for that, the patently offensive was first discovered in Roth v. U.S., United States. Okay, so if it shows patently offensive scenes. Now, here's the thing. This is the thing that a lot of things like companies like Playboy, the Playboy magazines, this is the final thing that allows them to get away with showing their stuff in the public. Does it lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value? If it does not lack those things, and like Playboy, it's a very obscene magazine, but they have interviews with famous people, interviews with political figures, and articles and things like that, things that give it literary value, which allows them that even though they still violate those first two, they don't violate the last one. They still have literary and artistic value to them, which allows them to continue posting, or not posting, but allows them to keep giving out their magazine in more of a public format than just keeping it all nice and, privatized. The very last thing is, the Supreme Court, when it comes to schools, students, is very, very all over the place. In Tinker v. Des Moines, that a student, I'm not going to get into the details, but a student wore an armband protesting the Vietnam War. The Supreme Court said that was okay. And piggyback court cases have said that students who wear shirts that necessarily the school doesn't like if someone were to wear a Trump shirt to a school saying, there was a student, a good example was a student wore a Trump shirt that said, welfare recipients watch out. That would technically be legal because it's not obscene, it's not necessarily obscene, it's not showing harsh or vulgar language like curse words and things like that. It's just expressing his political opinion, and he has the right to do it. Now, some Supreme Courts, or the Supreme Court, or a district court, not the Supreme Court, a district court did rule out that a student wasn't allowed to wear a Madison Manson shirt. I'm saying that right. A Marilyn Manson shirt. So it's really all over the place, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, I know I went way over my time, and I'm so sorry, but the freedom of speech is by far my favorite amendment, my second favorite amendment. Okay, I'm sorry I went over, but I promise you, I pinky promise you, I will stay within the 10-minute mark that I changed in the religion section on the press, assembly, and petition. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's all. If you need more information, like always, check out my website, and stay beautiful, Americans. Mwah. You didn't see me do that last part.